Okay. Before I start my discussion, I want you to know that this is recorded, so I can um, upload it in the Moodle right after we had our discussion. The second thing is that I want to check if my audio is clear. If it is clear, you can type in clear, so I can start my discussion. So my voice, my audio is clear? Okay, very good. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. So this afternoon, we're going to continue and hopefully we can finish the few remaining slides for our topic in diagnostic testing. Okay, yesterday we started our discussion on this topic and we said that diagnostic testing could either be invasive or non-invasive. Okay, and we also discussed the different roles of nurses when it comes to diagnostic testing. And we also discussed the different purposes of diagnostic testing, why is it done, and why is it necessary. And also, we have presented the different classifications or types of diagnostic testing. And we said the first one is diagnostic testing using the blood or the blood test. And there are several blood tests that we have discussed yesterday. We had the complete blood count. We had the serum osmolality. We also have drug monitoring. We also have blood chemistry. And we also have blood glucose testing. So this afternoon, we're going to discuss the remaining diagnostic testing. And the second one is about specimen testing. As you can see on the slide right now, there are 4 types of specimen testing that you can do with the patient. Okay? And one of the most common specimen okay, by the way, when we say specimen testing, we are taking samples of urine. It could be stool. It could be blood, or it could be wound drainage. Okay? And these specimens are sent for examination to visualize what's in it and to check if there are indications of illnesses or diseases in a patient. Now let's move on with the urine specimen. I know you are very familiar with the urine, and I know that you know what is urine itself. When a person is sick, or if the person is having some illness, by examining the urine, the doctor can identify the problem or the disease of the patient by just examining the content of the urine of a patient. Okay? And you will see here, okay? You will see here in the first photo, see, the urine is placed in a container, and after it is collected from the patient, the urine is sent to the laboratory for examination and testing. Now, as a nurse, why is it important for us to know the different types of urine testing? Because each urine testing has different preparation. Okay, let us try to take example of urine testing number 1. We have this clean, voided urine specimen, or most commonly called as urinalysis. This is routinely done in the hospital. Routinely done means the moment is admitted to the hospital, the moment the patient is brought into the hospital, right away the urine is tested. Okay? And how do you do this? Very easy. You just give, this bottle, this container to the patient. You ask your patient to void at least 10 ml of urine. Okay? Tell your patients to collect 10 ml of urine and then give it to the nurse and it will be sent for examination. As simple as that. That is clean, voided urine specimen. Okay. The second type of urinalysis or urine examination is called clean catch or midstream urine. This type of urine examination is very unique. Why? because the urine is sent for the laboratory examination in order to identify exactly what microorganism is causing infection to the patient. Okay? That's why it is called clean catch or midstream urine. Since the very purpose of this urine exam is to check for the presence of microorganism, it is very important for you, nurse, when you give instruction to your patient, you need to tell your patient not to contaminate the urine. Okay? Why not contaminate the urine? Remember, you are checking microorganism. If they collected the urine and they contaminated it with their hands or with the surroundings, during examination, you might see some microorganisms. So how do we ensure that the urine specimen of your patient is not contaminated when you do the clean catch or midstream specimen? First, you need to instruct your patients to do perineal care. Okay? To clean the perineal area before you collect the specimen. Number two, from the word itself, midstream, means when you ask your patient to void, the first few amount of urine that will come from the patient, you're not going to collect. But you're going to collect the urine from the patient at the middle. Why? Because the first few ml, the first few drops of urine from the patients might be contaminated already. It might have some solutes or it might have some contaminants. So the instruction, Mister, I want you to collect the urine, but collect at the middle of voiding. The first few ml, do not collect. At the middle, collect the urine specimen. That is for clean catch or midstream specimen. The third is timed urine specimen. This is a unique urine exam. Why? Because you need to ask your patient to collect the urine for a long period of time. It could even be for 24 hours. The patients will keep collecting the urine for 24 hours. Some, it could be 1 to 2 hours, but in some patients, it could be 24 hours. Look at this container on the slide right now. See? You would see a large volume of urine. Perhaps the patients collected the urine for 24 hours. And why do we do this test? Why do we do this timed urine specimen? Very easy. Because we want to assess if the kidneys are well functioning. We want to know if there is a problem with the patient's metabolism of sugar or glucose. Okay? These are the very basic purposes of timed urine specimen. Okay, the fourth one is called indwelling catheter specimen. Mister, what is indwelling catheter? Just try to look at the photo here in the slide, in the lower part. Okay, here. You would see that the patient had a catheter, a small tubing inserted to the reproductive system, to the bladder to facilitate urination. There are some patients who cannot void without the help of this tube. Okay? And if the doctor orders you to collect urine specimen from a patient with catheter, we use this indwelling catheter specimen collection. You will learn how to do this when you go to adult, but for now, you know already the description of this. And the most common test that we usually do in the hospital, even nurses will do this one, the urine testing. Okay, the last type of urine testing, wherein we examine the urine pH, specific gravity, urine pH, if it is acidic or if it is alkalinic. Specific gravity if the patient is dehydrated or if the patient is overhydrated. Usually we can see that by checking the urine. Also, presence of glucose, especially if the patient is diabetic, you would see also that there are some sugar in the urine. Or it could be ketones. Ketones are fats, okay? It could also be protein in the urine. Or most probably, we use this testing to see if there are blood in the urine of our patient. We call this one as urine testing or urine dipstick, this one. For the next example, This is what actually we are going to do in the lab a week after your exam. The procedure is called urine test strip or dipstick. You can see here the nurse is holding the urine sample from the patient, and the nurse is using a color-coded strip. These strips are actually reagents in order to see what are the contents of the urine. As I mentioned, it could be blood, it could be sugar, it could be fats, it could be protein. You will learn all these things when you go to the lab on the 10th week. Okay? And on the other side, you will see this bottle. We call this one as urine specimen collection bottle. When you collect urine from your patient, you ask your patient to void in this bottle and put the name of your patient, write the date and the time. You're going to do this urine test strip or dipstick test on the 10th week. This is a very exciting procedure. Okay, we are done with the urine testing. And we said that by looking or examining the urine, you can actually see if the patient has a problem. The same also with your stool, your feces. I know you are familiar with stool and feces. Just like what we had here, see in the photo, the person is defecating. Okay, if a person is sick or ill, it is also observable in the content of the stool. Okay, it is also confirmed by examining the feces or stool of your patient. See, just like what you did in urine, you ask your patient to defecate, and then you collect a small amount of stool or feces and put it in the specimen bottle. Now, what are the different purposes, mister? Why we need to check for stool specimen? Why we collect stool? Why we examine the stool? Okay, there are 4 reasons why the feces or the stool is checked. First is to determine presence of occult blood or Guyot test. Occult blood. Okay, normally, when a healthy person defecate, you will not see any blood at all in the feces or stool. However, if the person has a problem with the stomach, the person has a problem with the intestine, you can actually see some blood in the stool. Is it normal? No. The stool shouldn't have blood at all. We call it as Guyot test. The second one is to analyze for dietary products and digestive enzymes. Okay, especially if your patient has a problem with absorption of some vitamins. Your patient cannot absorb fats. Your patients cannot absorb, some nutrients. Maybe because there's a problem with the digestive enzymes. This is very common. When you see some fats in the stool, okay, that is abnormal. That means the patient cannot digest, cannot absorb the fats. And we call it as steatorrhea. Is it normal? No. It is not normal. Is it abnormal? And through stool examination, you can see that. Of course, the most common reason is to check for the presence of ova or parasites. Do you know what is ova and parasites? If there are some worms, especially among small children who loves to play outside, there might be some worms in the stool which cannot be seen by our eyes. But through microscope, but through stool examination, we can actually see these parasites. And most importantly, we do stool specimen to check for the presence of bacteria and viruses. Okay, now, what would be your nursing responsibility if your patient is for stool exam? The nurse play an important role on this. So what will you do? Okay, how do you ensure that the result of the stool exam is accurate? Okay, now these are the nursing management right now. Number 1 is avoid ingesting red meat, raw vegetables, and fruits, and certain medications like aspirin, like NSAID drugs, and vitamin C 3 days before the test. You might ask, Mister, why we need to avoid those things? Why we avoid meat? Why we avoid fruits? Even vitamin C should be avoided for a simple reason. Okay, those food, the vitamins, the medications should not be given 3 days before the test because it can cause false positive result. What is false positive result? That means even if the patient is not sick, when the stool is examined, it might show, some microorganisms or some blood or some other components which should not be there. We call it as false positive result, which means the result is not accurate. So how do you ensure that? Instruct your patient, Mister, means you will not take your vitamin C 3 days before the exam. You cannot eat red meat. You cannot eat raw vegetables, or else the result of your stool exam will be not accurate. The next one is specimen should not be contaminated. That's why your instruction to your patient is to after the patient's defecate in the toilet, okay, as a nurse, you need to get a tongue depressor and scoop a small amount of stool and put it in the specimen bottle and make sure it's not contaminated, or else, again, it will give you a false positive result. Okay, and the last is defecate in clean bedpan or commode. See, you will see here in the photos, there is an X, which means no vegetables, no red meat, no vitamin C, no aspirin. Aspirin, this is a common pain reliever that is usually being taken by the patient. It should be stopped 3 days before the test. Okay, aside from urine, aside from stool, sputum. Sputum means the respiratory secretion could also be a good way of examining whether the patient is having problem primarily on the respiratory system. By the way, sputum or respiratory secretion is different from saliva. It's different, okay? It's not saliva, it is sputum. Now, why sputum or why respiratory secretions are examined? For what reason? First is for culture and sensitivity. Means you want to know exactly what microorganism is causing the disease. Okay? And then the second one is cytology. Cytology means you want to know for the presence of cancer. Maybe the patient is coughing because the patient has lung cancer. Through sputum exam, you can actually identify that. Next is a test for presence of acid-fast bacillus. Mister, what is this acid-fast bacillus? These are microorganisms that are responsible for tuberculosis. Do you know what is tuberculosis? If you have a tuberculosis, you keep on coughing and coughing, you might cough with blood, and you will be very thin, and this condition is very communicable. Okay? We can also do sputum specimen. And of course, we do sputum specimen to see the progress, to see whether the medication the patient is taking is effective or not. Now, what would be your nursing role? What would be your nursing responsibility if your patient is for sputum exam? See, number one is specimen or the sputum itself. In the afternoon. Why not in the evening? Because in the morning, when the patient wakes up, the amount of secretions is huge. It is easy to collect specimen in the morning. Next, mouth care before and after collection shall be done, which means you ask your patients to clean the mouth before and after. Okay, and most importantly, use of gloves and PPE. Why? This sputum is considered as infected or infectious. It might have some microorganisms on it. And by the way, when you ask your patient for sputum specimen, you only ask for a maximum of 4 to 10 ml. That's a small amount. Okay? This is the right amount that is needed in order to have a good, examination of the sputum. This is called sputum. Again, sputum is different from saliva. You do not just say, sir, can you collect your saliva and then spit it out in the specimen bottle? It's no. It requires breathing and it requires coughing like that. And then ask your patient to collect it 4 to 10 ml. That is for sputum examination. Now, the last specimen examination is called throat culture or mouth swab. This is very common, especially these days. Why? Because of the coronavirus. If you wanted to know if you have the coronavirus, you just need to have a throat culture or oral swab. See the photo here down? Okay, a small applicator is inserted into the mouth, into the throat, okay, for the presence of any microorganisms. We call it as throat culture. Now, okay, this is an example of the photo here, the throat swab or throat culture. A small swab, is inserted into the mouth, and the back of the throat is usually swabbed. Okay? And this will be examined in the laboratory to see if the patient has some microorganisms. Okay. Now at this point, since my apps here is not working, it's fine if you're not going to use your cell phones because it's not working, but I want you to answer this one. The physician orders a urine test for culture and sensitivity. Which test do you expect to be done? I want you to write your answer in the chat box. What do you think is the answer? What do you think is the answer? Type in the chat box, please. The physician orders a urine test for culture and sensitivity. Which test do you expect to be done? I only one student answering. I only see one student answering. Okay, Rafida says clean voided. Clean voided. One answers clean voided. Suha answered clean catch. Shaika answered midstream. Buthaina answers clean catch. Warda says midstream. Okay. I am going to call one student. I'm going to start with the boys again. Al-Muaid. Muaid, open your audio. What is your answer? Okay, I'm calling Salem. What do you think is the answer?
I think clean catch. Clean catch.
Clean catch. Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm going to call one more. Basma. Basma. Okay, I'm going to call Suha Al-Abri.
Clean catch or midstream specimen.
Okay, the answer is clean catch. Why it is not clean voided?
Clean voided for check presence of microorganisms.
Okay. And for midstream?
No. Clean voided, yes, for microorganisms, but it is routine.
Yes.
And clean catch, it's there's many precautions should patient do it.
Okay, very good. Okay, this is midstream urine or clean catch. Why? Because this test is intended for examination for any presence of specific microorganisms. The clean voided is it's a routine examination. Okay, with very minimal precautions. But with the midstream urine, you need to give a definite instruction that the urine should be middle stream. Okay. Okay, I think this is the last topic. I still have very few, I think less than 5 slides. Okay, we're done with blood test. We're done with specimen testing. At this point, we're going to discuss what are the different procedures to visualize. To visualize means to see. Okay, to see, to check certain body organs or system with the use of instruments, with the use of technology. Okay, now I'm going directly with the different types of visualization procedure. I think it's in the next few slides. Okay, see. Okay, now the first one is procedures for gastrointestinal problem. If you have problems with your stomach, if you have abdominal pain, and the doctor wants to confirm, the doctor wants to know exactly what is causing the disease, okay, the doctor might say, okay, I want to order visualization procedure of the gastrointestinal system. You would expect several visualization procedures. Okay, here are the procedures that we usually do in the hospital to see, to visualize the gastrointestinal system using some apparatus. Okay, I'm so sorry if some photos are quite offending, but this is very important for our learning. I hope it is okay with you. Now, the first one is anoscopy. Anoscopy, this is a visualization procedure. From the word itself, oscopy. Oscopy means visualization procedure. Ano means anal canal or anus. That's why anoscopy is viewing of anal canal. We have proctoscopy. This is viewing of the rectum. Okay? We have proctosigmoidoscopy. This is a visualization procedure to check for the rectum and the sigmoid. We also have colonoscopy in order to check the large intestine. So how it is done? You will see on the slide, see the first slide. There's a hand, and the nurse or the doctor is inserting a tube, an instrument. And normally this instrument, on the tip of this instrument has a small camera. Okay? And once it is inserted into the gastrointestinal tract, the doctor can actually see in the screen the structure of the intestines or the structure of the GI tract. And the doctor will know exactly what is causing the disease. Okay? These are visualization procedure. Aside from visualization procedure, we also have barium swallow. Barium swallow. What is barium swallow? Okay, if the patient is ordered for barium swallow, perhaps the patient has a problem with swallowing, or the patient is complaining of difficulty of swallowing every time she eats. So the doctor might say, okay, let's do barium swallow so I can see why you have difficulty of swallowing. This procedure is special because before the examination, the patient takes or drinks barium sulfate. What is barium sulfate? This is a chemical, okay, given to the patients to drink before the exam. And after this barium is, taken by the patient, the patients will be sent for X-ray. And through X-ray, okay, this barium will be very visible on the X-ray. And it will really show you the outline of the structure of the gastrointestinal system. If there is an obstruction, or if there is some mass, or if there is some tumor. Just like, for example, this photo, see? The patient has a cancer. And after the patient drinks the barium, the patient was taken to the X-ray, and you will see here that in the X-ray result, that the esophagus is constricted. Perhaps there is a mass and there is a cancer, and that is very visible for barium swallow. Now, how about the lower intestinal tract, the rectum, the large intestine? If we have barium swallow to check the structure of the esophagus and the stomach, we also have this barium enema to check for the structure of the colon and the rectum. Okay. In barium swallow, the patient takes or drinks the barium. In barium enema procedure, definitely the patients will not drink the barium. Instead, the barium sulfate is given through enema, means it will be introduced through the rectum. Okay? It will be introduced through the rectum, and the same process, the patients will be brought to X-ray, and in the X-ray, the doctor will actually see the structure of the large intestine and the rectum. Why? Because the barium enema is very visible through X-ray. Okay, I know it's difficult for you to absorb concepts like this. However, when you go to adult, you will witness how this procedure is done, and you will be explained by your teacher what are the different preparations that you need to do before you bring your patients for this examination. For now, I just want you to know the concept. I just want you to know the terms that we use so that when you go to adult one, you are ready. Okay, if we have visualization procedure for the gastrointestinal tract, we also have visualization procedure for the urinary system. Okay, what are these? What are the different procedures to visualize, to check, to see the structure of the urinary system? The first one is KUB. X-ray of the KUB means kidney, ureter, bladder. How is the procedure done? You just bring your patient to the X-ray room, and then the X-ray technician will do the X-ray, and you will visualize exactly the problem with the kidneys, the problems with the ureter and the bladder. See the first photo here. This is an X-ray result, and you can actually visualize the kidney, the ureter, and the bladder. And the doctor can actually diagnose if the patient has a problem or not. That is X-ray. Aside from X-ray, you can also have ultrasound. I know you are very familiar with ultrasound. Okay? Ultrasound. This is very common if your mother or your sister is pregnant. Through ultrasound, a small probe is placed on the abdomen, and it will create a sound wave. And this sound wave will visualize the structure of the stomach or the kidneys. The same process with renal ultrasonography. A small probe is placed over the abdomen, and the sound wave will be created, and you can actually see the structure of the kidneys. See the second photo. This is the kidney through ultrasound, and the doctor can actually tell through ultrasonography if the kidneys has a problem or not. Okay, now there are other complex procedures to examine whether there is some problems or diseases or illnesses of the urinary system. We have this retrograde pyelography. We have here, this one is already repeated. We have cytoscopy. Now, what is pyelography? From the word itself, graphy. Remember in the first slide, we have barium enema taken by the patient. In this procedure, the same process, a contrast medium similar to barium, is instilled directly into the kidneys. Okay? This contrast medium is instilled directly to the kidneys, and through X-ray again, the doctor can actually visualize the structure of the kidneys if there are some problems. This includes an introduction of contrast dye. This contrast dye is very helpful because it reacts to X-ray, and the X-ray can actually visualize the structure of the kidneys. Cystoscopy is an invasive procedure. Just like what you see on the slide right now, see the doctor is holding some apparatus. Okay, this we call it a cystoscope. Okay, and this apparatus is inserted into the reproductive system of the male and the female patient. And the doctor will visualize through this cystoscope. The doctor can actually visualize what is the problem inside the bladder. This instrument is called cystoscope. Okay, and the procedure is called cystoscopy. Okay, I think we still have. Okay, these procedures involves, these are visualization procedures to see if your patient has cardiac problem. We have visualization procedure for gastrointestinal system. We have visualization procedure for the urinary system. At this point, visualization procedure with the cardiovascular system of the heart. How do we know if the patient has a problem with the heart? Through visualization procedure. I know you are familiar with this. The first one is electrocardiography. Okay? ECG. It is a very simple procedure. See, the doctor might put some probe over your chest area. See the first photo? And this probe is attached into the machine, and it will send electrical activity. And the doctor, okay, upon checking for the result of this electrocardiography, the doctor can actually tell whether the patient has heart problem. This is also called as ECG, or graphic recording of heart's electrical activity. Now, the second procedure is quite very invasive because it poses a risk to your patient. We call this one as angiography. I do not know if you have heard angiography. Okay, this is a radiographic study of the heart vessels where patient is injected, radiopaque dye, and X-rays are done. It is almost similar with barium. Okay, however, in this procedure is that, remember your heart has a lot of blood vessels that supplies blood to the heart muscles itself. Now, there are some patients that has heart problem wherein the blood vessels are blocked with fats or some blood clots, and it causes severe pain on their chest. And if the doctor really wanted to see which blood vessels has a problem, which blood vessels is black, the doctor might perform angiography. Okay? In this process, the patient is injected radiopaque dye. It's like a contrast. This substance reacts to X-ray. Once the patient is injected this radiopaque dye, okay, upon X-ray, okay, the doctor can actually visualize which blood vessels is blocked, which blood vessels has a problem. Why? Again, the radiopaque dye is very visible on X-rays. You will see exactly which blood vessels is involved. And the last is echocardiogram. These procedures requires ultrasound again. See the photo that we have here on the lower slides? A transducer or a probe is placed over the chest area, okay, and it will create sound wave. And this sound wave can actually visualize heart structure. Okay, and the doctor can actually see what is the problem with the heart. Is it enlarged or does it have any problems? Okay, electrocardiography, we have angiography, we have echocardiogram. Just make sure that you are familiar with the term. Okay, but for the preparation of the patient and nursing intervention, it will be discussed in your next courses in Adult 1. For now, be oriented with the different terms that we are using. Okay, and I think this is the last two slides that we have. Okay, we have the aspiration process or aspiration procedure. Just like we discussed 2 days ago, we said aspiration includes withdrawal of fluid from certain body parts. And this fluid can actually tell the doctors, or composition of this fluid can actually tell the doctor if the patient is sick or not. Now, what are the different aspiration procedure? We have lumbar puncture. From the word itself, lumbar, it means your vertebrae. It means your spinal cord. It has a fluid in your spinal cord. Okay, we call it as cerebrospinal fluid. When you aspirate cerebrospinal fluid from your lumbar area with the use of the needle, the procedure is called lumbar puncture. I want you to see the photo, the first photo here. See? The patient is positioned in lateral position. See? And with the use of the needle, the doctor withdraws some fluid from the spinal cord, and it will be examined for presence of many microorganisms or any other conditions. The procedure is called lumbar puncture. Okay? The second one is abdominal paracentesis. From the word itself, abdominal, which means the doctor might withdraw some fluid from the abdominal cavity. Okay? Excess peritoneal fluid is withdrawn from the abdominal area. I want you to see the photo. This one, abdominal paracentesis. This is especially common if your patient has liver problem. And if your patient has liver problem or liver disease, the fluid might abnormally be collected in the abdomen. Okay, in the peritoneal cavity. Peritoneal cavity, there should be no fluid. But if the patient has a problem, the fluid will abnormally collect in the peritoneal cavity. In the process of checking for the fluid content or taking a fluid from the peritoneal cavity is called abdominal paracentesis. See this photo? A small needle is inserted into the abdomen and it is connected into the tube and into the container, and the fluid from the abdomen will be collected. This procedure is called abdominal paracentesis. Okay, we also have the last one, thoracentesis. Abdominal paracentesis, fluid from the peritoneal area. Thoracentesis from the thorax. Thorax means what? The lungs. Okay? See the thorax? I want you to see the photo here down. See? Again, a small needle is inserted into the thoracic cavity. Normally, the thoracic cavity should have no fluid. If there is a fluid buildup on that area, that means the person is having some illness or disease. Okay, see? Through aspiration procedure, a fluid is removed from pleural cavity with a small needle, and this will be examined to check for the presence of any diseases. Don't worry, this is the last slide that we have. We're done with blood test, we're done with specimen, we're done with visualization, we're done with aspiration, and the last is biopsy. A small tissue is removed from a specific part of the body, and this tissue will be examined for presence of certain diseases, specifically cancer, and we call this procedure as biopsy. Okay, there are 2 types of biopsy that you can actually see in the hospital. The first one is bone marrow biopsy. See? You know where's bone marrow? Bone marrow is in the bone. Especially if the doctor is suspecting that the patient has leukemia. You know what is leukemia? Leukemia, that is cancer of the blood. So how do you know if the patient has cancer of the blood? The doctor might suggest bone marrow biopsy. Remember, the bone marrow are premature blood cells. They are the ones responsible for the development of blood cells, the bone marrow. If the person has leukemia, there is a blood cancer, most probably the doctor can diagnose the patient by taking a small amount of bone marrow tissue, okay, through biopsy, and this bone marrow will be examined in the lab or presence of cancer. And normally the site where bone marrow is taken is from the pelvis. You know the pelvis, you know that already. And the second form of biopsy is the liver biopsy. If the doctor is suspecting that the patient has liver cancer, you know what is liver cancer, right? If the doctor is suspecting that the patient has liver cancer, the doctor might say, okay, let us perform biopsy. Okay, and how is this biopsy being done? Again, a small needle is inserted into the right side of your abdomen, and a small amount of tissue from the liver is taken. See the photo? Okay, see the photo? A small tissue is taken, it will be examined by the microscope, and the doctor can actually visualize. The doctor can actually see, oh, the liver tissues, it has some cancers. And then the doctor can diagnose whether the patient has liver cancer or not. These are classic example of biopsy. Now, this is the last slide that we have. What are the possible nursing diagnoses if your patient is scheduled for diagnostic testing? As I mentioned earlier, one of the most common problem of the patient, if the patient is scheduled for testing, is anxiety and fear. Why? Why would the patient be anxious and fearful? Of course, the patient might be uncertain what would be the diagnosis of the patient. What would be my sickness? What would be the result? Am I sick or not? See, anxiety or fear related to possible diagnosis. Maybe it's cancer, maybe it's not, but you do not know, and the patients will be anxious. The second one is impaired physical mobility. Why? There are some diagnostic procedures that requires patient to stay still on the bed. Like for example, visualization procedure. The patient has to be in lateral position for a few minutes. Or for lumbar tap procedure, the patient has to be on sideline procedure for several minutes. And the patients are physically immobile. The patients cannot move because the procedure requires the patients not to move. Again, that is a problem. And most importantly, deficient knowledge. Most patients, especially those who do not have background on health, doesn't have background on medicine, the most common problem with them is deficient knowledge. They do not know what is the procedure. They do not know what's the purpose of the procedure. And as a nurse, by identifying this nursing diagnosis, you know that the patient has deficient knowledge. Your role, of course, is what? To give health education. You need to tell the patient the purpose of this procedure. You need to tell the patient what are the possible risks involved in this procedure. How about anxiety and fear? What would be your nursing diagnosis if your patient is anxious? You need to reassure the patient. You need to be with the patient, okay? And you need to explain to the patient the different, steps or process that he will undergo with this procedure, and those things will help, relax your patient and alleviate anxiety and fear. These are the possible nursing diagnoses that we have. Now, that ends our discussion on diagnostic testing. Now, if you have some questions, you can open your audio, or you can actually type in your question. Okay, you can type in your question in the chat box, or if you have some clarifications. Any questions or any clarifications? Okay, if there are no questions, I have a question. And I'm going to call, we still have 7 minutes, I'm going to call 3 students. Okay, be ready, I'm going to call students. Okay, Iman Al-Salti, you said no question, but I have a question. Can you open your audio? Iman?